Great. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matilda. I am the Communications and Events Manager at EURASHI, which is the European Association for the Applied Sciences in Higher Education. We are a network of applied sciences universities based in Brussels, but we represent members all over Europe and actually also some extra European members, for example, in Egypt, other countries in Northern Africa, India, and so on. And just a few, let's say, a few, basic rules for this webinar. So you are all muted as participants, but if in any moment, any point you want to ask a question, you're very welcome to use the chat or the Q&A function, or you can also raise your hand and you will be given permission to speak, and we can also make the discussion more engaging. There we go. So on this webinar, we are happy to collaborate with the European Association for International Education, the EAIE. And we have here today two speakers, Laura Rumbley and Jody Hoekstra-Selten. Laura is the Director for Research and Knowledge Development, and Jody is the Senior Knowledge Development Officer, both working for the EAIE. And they will give us today a presentation about the EAIE Barometer, the third edition of the report, which just came out recently. And they will give us also some insights for the applied sciences sector specifically. So Jody and Laura, I'm going to give it over to you if you want to give us maybe a short introduction to yourselves and also to the topic of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matilda. It's lovely to be with you today. Jody and I are delighted to be in your company. We have been living with the EAIE Barometer 3rd edition for quite some time now. We've done lots of presentations around the world on the data that we collected in the autumn of 2023. But this is the first time that we've had an opportunity to have a directed conversation with the University of Applied Sciences community. So this is a very special moment for us. Thank you for having us. I serve as the Director for Knowledge Development and Research at the EAIE, and I'd like to share a visual aid, if I may, on the many pieces of data that we will be sharing with you today. Let me just get this into full screen form. And before I do so, would like to turn it over to Jody to just introduce herself.
Yes, thank you, Laura. So my name is Jody. I work as Senior Knowledge Development Officer for the EAIE, and indeed delighted to be here with all of you today to share a little bit of our data really, but hopefully some interesting things for you in there.
Now, I know as we continue, you will say probably you promised just a little data, and in fact, we're going to share a lot of data with you. This is a very data-heavy presentation. The idea is not to overwhelm you with numbers, but actually to give you pieces of information to chew on and think about. The data that we're providing does not provide the end-all be-all answers to internationalization at the universities of applied sciences across the European higher education area. I think what it provides is a really interesting foundation for some conversation about what is going on in the field and what is the health and vitality of the sector. So as we spend our time with you over the next hour, what we'd like to cover is some information about what exactly the EAIE Barometer is, some key statistics from our 3rd edition, and some very particular information relevant to universities of applied sciences, including the profile of the respondents who fed us information via the survey, information about how respondents perceive their own roles working in international higher education at the moment, what they think about what their institutions are doing, and then some particular insights into responses having to do with European-funded programs and some particular topics of interest. And we'll get into those details along the way. And we're also, of course, trying our best to leave room for questions and answers at the end. Please know that a copy of this presentation will be provided to you. So if numbers flash by too quickly, you will have a chance to go back and spend some time with them. And if there are any questions that we can't answer in the moment, we're very happy to work on those after the presentation and come back to you with some answers because there is a lot of data to sift through. So before we begin the barometer, just a couple of words about the EAIE if you're not familiar with us. And I see Piet van Hove, a past president of the EAIE, is in the audience, so he could probably deliver this part of the presentation. But for those of you who might not know us as well, just a quick word that we are a nonprofit, member-led organization based in Amsterdam, a little over 35 years old at this point. We have about 3,000 to 3,500 members annually, but a very large annual conference that you might know us best from. Typically more than 7,000 people in the last couple of years have been attending our annual conference. We also do many other things throughout the year to support our members who are all professionals working in the field of international higher education. Our members are not universities, but rather the individuals working in those contexts. We do trainings, publications, podcasts. We have recently launched a job board and do on the side of all of that, a bit of research, which is what we're talking to you about today. As an organization, we have three main areas of interest. We're trying to support our membership so to enable the sector. We're keen to provide information about what's happening in the sector, both to demonstrate the impact of internationalization, as well as to feed into important conversations within institutions at national or European level to kind of influence and engage how people understand international higher education at the moment in the European context. So the barometer exercise that we're talking to you about is quite relevant in the context of these various pillars that we have to support our field. Last but not least, wanting to say a quick word. Interestingly enough, the EAIE does not subscribe to a particular definition for internationalization. What we do have, though, is a picture of what our field encompasses. And you can see that here on the screen with the list of our 9 thematic committees and the EAIE taxonomy that encompasses the work that we do or the topics that we're interested in. So our interest in internationalization spans everything from student and staff mobility to leadership strategy and policy, questions of social responsibility within the international higher education context, and more. And you'll see that our barometer work covered this landscape as well in a variety of different ways. So just some information for you to understand where we're coming from as the EAIE. Last piece of information before we get into the barometer details, we do have a research agenda over the last couple of years. It has consisted of these 5 pillars that you see here. The EAIE Barometer is really an anchoring pillar for us. It's an ongoing project, and you'll hear more about it in a moment. But we also offer research snapshots. So if you're looking for information about other research projects that are taking place in our field, we have a library of concise synopses of current research that you may want to dip into as an EAIE member. We're also recently beginning to do some funding of research. And our first foray into that is a new fund for supporting doctoral students who are doing research on internationalization. And in the past couple of years, we've paid some particular attention to 2 topics: environmental sustainability and climate action, as well as national policies for internationalization. Just a week or so ago, we released a report on that picture of national policies for internationalization across the European higher education area. So we're active in a variety of different areas in the research space, but our main priority today is to tell you about the EAIE Barometer. So the barometer is, in fact, an ongoing, periodically repeated survey exercise that the EAIE has been doing for the last decade, 3 iterations so far, 2015, 2018, and 2024. The purpose of the barometer is really to capture the picture of internationalization across the European higher education area from the perspective of the professionals who are directly carrying out this work, whether that's within the context of universities or perhaps in the context of working at national agencies, ministries, commercial organizations, nonprofits, etc. So this really makes it the largest and most geographically representative survey of its kind in the European context. In the 3rd edition, in 2024, we took a particular direction with the work of the survey. Over the 3 iterations of the survey of the last decade, there have certainly been repeated questions and repeated focal points to allow us to have a bit of a longitudinal picture of what's happening in particular areas. But in each instance, in 2015, 2018, and 2024, there have been some slight variations in what we've done in order to capture some of the feelings and dynamics of the moment. For the 2024 edition, you can see on the screen here the 5 key areas in which our survey really paid special attention. We wanted to understand how individuals working in the field are feeling about their work, their particular experience as professionals in the field. We wanted to gain their perceptions on how they feel about how their organization or institution structures the work of internationalization, how they feel about that structure and strategy. If individuals have budget responsibilities, what they think about those budgets and their stability and appropriateness. We also asked some questions around the impact of internationalization, again, from the perspective of these individuals. And then we took a bit of a dive into some specific hot topics to get a sense from individuals how they think their institutions are doing on these topics and what this means to them. So this was really kind of the overarching picture of what this iteration of the barometer offers. When it comes to now what we learned specifically, here's some high-level pieces of information. And again, we'll get into some greater detail. We had nearly 3,000 individual responses from 46 of the 49 European higher education area countries. The 3 countries that were missing from the data are the Holy See, Moldova, and San Marino. We hope to capture them in future iterations, of course. The data is quite representative geographically. We got responses from all across the region. Perhaps not surprisingly, Western Europe was well represented in the data, Western Asia less represented, but still in the picture for sure. Most respondents, a little over half, work at research universities, but we definitely have responses from over 20% of the total from the University of Applied Sciences sector, and a large percentage of individuals telling us that they work in the public sector. So I think quite representative of the picture in the European higher education area. We had an interesting first of its kind question this time in the survey that asked individuals to give us a sense of whether or not they identify personally as belonging to an underrepresented group in their context, in their national context. Jody can talk a little bit more about that as she talks about the respondent profiles, but we think that's an interesting question in the context of increasing interest over the last several years in inclusion and diversity in the higher education sector and internationalization specifically. But generally speaking, a broad range of responses across Europe in terms of types of roles, types of institutions, and different levels of experiences that the respondents have. With that overview picture, I'm going to turn it over to Jody to take us into some greater detail.
Thank you, Laura. So indeed, if we look at the profile of respondents, we can see on the slide here that we've been quite lucky in that we have been getting quite a number of responses since the start of the barometer in 2015. So for this first edition, we got roughly 2,400 responses from 32 different countries. In 2018, for the second edition, this was slightly less because we also decided to reduce the scope a bit. So where for the 2015 version, we invited anyone working within the field of internationalization in higher education to fill in the survey. In 2018, the decision was made to only limit this to people actually linked to higher education institutions. In 2024, the most recent edition, then we once again decided to open that up again. So also people working for national agencies, ministries of education, NGOs, etc. Basically, anyone working within internationalization of higher education was welcome to fill in that survey. So we managed to get 2,817 responses in total from 46 countries in the EHEA, as Laura has already indicated. And if we then look at the universities of applied sciences, we can see that 22% of the overall respondents, so that's roughly 552 responses, were collected from those type of institutions. So a nice data pool from us to dive into today. If we then look at the real profile itself of these responses from universities of applied sciences, we can see that all levels of experience are represented. So we have people that have just started out within their roles within the field, but also those that have been there for a longer period of time. Linked to the question that Laura just raised about belonging to an underrepresented group, we see that 15% of the universities of applied sciences respondents indeed identify in this way. We have respondents with varying periods of experience within their current role and also representing different roles. So we have heads of international offices, but also mobility coordinators, faculty members, etc. So really different roles from the field represented in there. When we look at the focus areas that they mainly work in, we see that that mainly has to do with student and staff mobility, partnerships, and European funded programs. And the majority of these respondents linked to universities of applied sciences work at a public institution. All right, so let's dive into the first section of data then, which really looks at respondents and how they feel about their own roles and satisfaction levels linked to that. So on this first graph, we asked respondents to fill in an answer related to 5 different topic areas related to how satisfied or dissatisfied they are with particular aspects of their work. So the blue and the red, so the 2 bars on the left, these indicate satisfaction, either satisfied or very satisfied. So we can see that overall there are some very positive responses here related to the overall job role and position and the sense of purpose that people get from their jobs, both on the EHEA level and on the Universities of Applied Sciences level. We see very high levels of satisfaction there. Those drop a bit when we look, for example, at the sense of feeling valued by the employer and also the work-life balance, with salary and compensation coming in with the lowest levels of satisfaction. This is the trend that we also see on an EHEA level. What is quite interesting to see here is that when it comes to salary and compensation, the respondents linked to Universities of Applied Sciences actually were a bit more positive, a bit more satisfied than the EHEA average, but also the research university average. So obviously, I'm guessing that some people in the audience here will be able to reflect on that a bit more honestly than I can from my position, but that is what came out of the data that we collected. But I would say overall a pretty positive picture with high levels of satisfaction. We also asked, thinking back that this survey was sent out in 2023, we'd obviously all gone through quite a few things that happened in the world. So we included a question on whether people that have been within the same role for the past year at least, saw whether their roles have changed over the past couple of years. And we can see here on the graph that 18% of respondents indicated that their role had not changed. The role now, or both of those. And this was very in line with the EHEA responses on average. Linked to change, we often see a need for professional development. So we included a few questions on that topic, including whether there are clear career development opportunities from entry level to advanced level at institutions or organizations. We see a bit of a mixed bag of responses here. So roughly 25% indicated that they agree with this statement, but 44% actually disagreed or strongly disagreed, and the rest remained unsure or neither agreed nor disagreed. So I think this is something where there is definitely still room for improvement at institutions or organizations, since it provides a bit of a divided picture across the board. We then also asked how respondents would characterize their need for training or professional development. And we see there for the Universities of Applied Sciences, only 1% indicated they have no need for training. So once again, a very convincing majority. And this is very much in line with the EHEA, where we saw similar percentages. If we then ask how satisfied the respondents actually were with the training and professional development opportunities provided to them at their institution or organization, we see a bit more diversity there. So in this case, roughly 62% is satisfied or very satisfied with the opportunities provided to them. But at the same time, we do see 33% indicating being very or unsatisfied. So once again, still relatively high levels, considering that 1/3 is unsatisfied with the number of training professional development opportunities provided to them. Maybe a little bit of a difference then between the research universities and the Universities of Applied Sciences is that at the research universities, we saw even lower levels of satisfaction and way higher levels of dissatisfaction. So that was a little difference we did see there. We then also included a question on whether respondents still see themselves working at their institution or organization in the next 3 years, and if they still see themselves working within the field within the next 3 years. So we see that roughly 69%, so a convincing majority, indicates that yes, they do still see themselves working at their institution in 3 years. And an even higher percentage, 78%, still sees themselves working within the sector. This is very much in line with the EHEA average. But we do see a bit of a difference with the research universities. And Laura, if you can give it one more click, then I think those bars will show up. Yeah, so we do see slightly higher levels of satisfaction there amongst the research universities. So 81% of respondents indicating they still see themselves working within the sector. But strikingly, a lot less uncertainty. So where 16% of respondents from universities of applied sciences indicated, I'm just not sure if I'll still be working within the field, that was a lot lower for the EHEA average and even lower for the research universities, where only 2% indicated this. But overall, I think very positive overview, of course, of people being committed to their institutions and to the sector. All right, I think that is where I hand it back over to Laura to tell you a little bit more about respondents and their reactions to questions about their institutions.
Thank you, Jody. So indeed, I'm going to take you through a series of questions that have to do with this sense of how respondents see their institutions. Again, not trying to overload you with data, but there is a fair amount here. Just take a breath with us and we'll try to be as measured as we can. So one of the questions that has been asked across the various iterations of the barometer is the one that you see on your screen currently, having to do with how responsibility for internationalization is structured or organized at your institution. So the University of Applied Sciences results are similar to the overall EHEA average with a few small differences. Internationalization being embedded in the overall strategy. We have apologies, I'm out of order here with my notes, looking here at a different set of notes. So responsibility for internationalization being organized in different ways, whether that's a single central team, multiple teams, or a combination of central and decentral teams. What we've seen in the data over time is a trend away from single central teams or centralization of responsibility to greater decentralization. And we see that here, that it is more common for there to be decentralization of this responsibility within the University of Applied Sciences, rather than having single central teams or multiple central teams. However, there's a slightly greater chance within universities of applied sciences that there will be a centralization of these responsibilities as compared to research universities. This may have something to do with the size of institutions. Perhaps research universities are a bit larger, tend to have more faculties across which decentralization might occur, but not a major difference from what we've seen at the European level or against research universities. So a question here about satisfaction with how responsibilities are organized. What we find here is that there is, a glass half full, glass half empty kind of picture. We see that there is, over 50% of respondents indicating that they are satisfied with how responsibilities are organized at their institution, but a not insignificant number that also show unsatisfied or very unsatisfied. So I think this is a question that can result in some conversations within institutions about that matter of organization and how and in what ways that's working or not working. I think it's also very interesting to take a look here at these issues of confidence in leadership for internationalization, whether or not that sits in a strong space or not. And again, we see here more than half being very confident or competent, but more than 30% also expressing some concerns about whether or not they feel confident in their leadership for internationalization. And again, this is something that can generate some very interesting conversations at an institutional level. So now to this question of whether or not there's a formal policy or strategy for internationalization. This is a question that has been carried across multiple years or multiple instances of the barometer. Here we see that internationalization being a strategy level than it is at the EHEA average, which is 21%, or the research university average of 22%. We also found here that universities of applied sciences more often have a strategy for internationalization in preparation. So you see that's 15%, slightly higher than the EHE average of 12% or the research university average of 10%. So, this is, I think, not a great difference, but something that shows that University of Applied Sciences are moving to prepare their strategies in some important ways. We asked respondents to give us an indication of whether or not their institution has a clearly defined set of goals for internationalization, and if that's the case, whether or not they think those goals for internationalization are achievable. What we found here is that there were very similar results for the Universities of Applied Sciences as compared to the EHEA average. 57% strongly agrees or agrees with this statement that there is a clearly defined set of goals, and that's a majority. But a notable 27% gave either a neutral, neither agrees nor disagrees, or an unsure answer. And 16% either disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement. So if those goals have been clearly set, the sense of achievability is quite strong here. 80% either strongly agreed or agreed that those goals that are clearly identified are achievable. This is also in line with the EHEA average. And from our perspective, this is really encouraging. Where there is clarity, there seems to be confidence in achievability. So what or who is driving the successful establishment of clear goals for internationalization? The frontrunner factors or main drivers for the full data set were a clear strategy, inspiring and effective leadership, and strong support amongst administrative and academic staff. For the University of Applied Sciences, what you hear or what you see on the screen here is that similarly, a clear strategy was the most frequently indicated main driver, allowing clearly defined sets of goals to be established. However, inspiring and effective institutional leadership was less frequently chosen as a main driver. So we get back to that issue of leadership. Only 40% of University of Applied Sciences respondents indicated this against a 48% average for the European higher education area and 51% of research universities. Strong support amongst administrative staff and strong support amongst academic staff are more frequently considered to be important drivers by the Universities of Applied Sciences than the other groups. And it's also interesting for us to see here on the screen that strong support amongst current students and alumni were less frequently chosen by Universities of Applied Sciences. So the dynamic of student engagement and involvement is one that is an interesting question for us. So a slightly more complicated graph on the screen here. This question asked, how would you characterize the influence of the following stakeholder groups in driving your internationalization goals? So the top line here is the executive board or team that was most often seen as influential or highly influential. So look at those blue and red bands. This was true for Universities of Applied Sciences as well as for other respondents across the EHEA. Only one somewhat notable difference here concerns the European level authorities. So if you look down the graph here to the fourth line, European level authorities, 53% across the European higher education area considered this group, European level authorities, to be either influential or highly influential in driving their institutions' internationalization goals. But only 48% of the Universities of Applied Sciences felt the same way. So that's an interesting question for us about the dynamic between Universities of Applied Sciences and the European level dynamics that are going on. All right, so we move now into perhaps our most complicated graph that we'll share with you. It's kind of a visual overload, but I think what we want to draw your attention to are, again, the blue and red bands. And the question here asked respondents to give us an indication of the degree to which, or the interest in the following topics as being relevant to the achievement of internationalization goals over the next 3 to 5 years. So respondents were not asked to prioritize or rank these activities. They were simply asked to indicate, as you look at this activity one by one, do you think your institution needs to devote more attention to that activity, a continued or steady state level of attention, less attention, et cetera, to achieve goals over the next 3 to 5 years? What we found, as you'll see on the screen here, is that the top 3 areas in which universities of applied sciences respondents indicated that more attention is necessary were strengthening international intercultural content of the curriculum, virtual internationalization activities like COIL and virtual exchange, and the digitalization of administrative tasks. This was consistent with the European higher education area average, except digitalization and virtual international activities were flipped into the second and third positions. But essentially, the top 3 were the same. What was interesting for us is to see that universities of applied sciences more often felt that international development and capacity building projects required more attention over the next 3 to 5 years. So that 56% of respondents from universities of applied sciences indicated more attention. And you can see the difference there against research universities and the average for Europe at 46% and 50%. So I think that does say something about the orientation of universities of applied sciences and the important role that they play in this particular area. The last couple of comments we want to make on the screen, if you combine the blue and red bars, so more attention and continued levels of attention, we see the top priorities for universities of applied sciences respondents to be partnerships and networks and student and staff mobility, alongside strengthening the international and intercultural content of the curriculum. These are also in line with the overall European picture. The bottom line, I think, of this very complicated slide is the sense that everything needs attention. And for us, that's a really interesting finding. On the one hand, it sets up a big challenge. How do institutions focus on all of this and make decisions about priorities and how they're going to do this work? On the other hand, we're really delighted to see that there's a strong sense that internationalization is a very complex, multifaceted phenomenon. It's not just mobility. It's not just recruiting international talent. It's a whole suite of things. And for us, that's wonderful to see that robust understanding of internationalization as being multidimensional. So the last bit of information that I'll share with you before handing it back to Jody has to do with some European-funded programs findings. So we worked with the European Commission on a series of questions that would try to get at some data having to do with Erasmus Plus issues and opportunities, as well as some other aspects of interest to the European Commission. What you see on the screen here are some questions about Erasmus Plus opportunities for staff. There are 6 different areas here, ranging from my work environment allows me to participate in Erasmus Plus mobility without obstacles. I feel incentivized to participate. My participation in these activities is recognized and rewarded by my institution, etc. For 5 of the 6 questions that you see on the screen here, around 60% of respondents registered fairly positive reactions. They either strongly agreed or agreed that there were good dynamics around their participation in these opportunities. The question that garnered fewer positive responses was the one related to institutional recognition and rewards for participation in Erasmus Plus staff mobility. Only 51% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that this was the case. Interestingly, though, when we compare the University of Applied Sciences responses to the research universities' responses, universities of applied sciences were generally more positive in answering this question than the research universities. So to me, that's kind of interesting when we look back at that previous question, that internationalization goals are not perceived as being driven so much by European level actors, but benefits are being derived in some way from Erasmus Plus staff opportunities. We had a series of questions we've divided into a couple of parts here, having to do with other kinds of programs and policies and initiatives that the European Commission funds. Anything here from whether or not the institution it promotes Erasmus Plus opportunities for cooperation within or without, beyond Europe, or with mobility opportunities. And the main picture to take away from this graph is that there are robust perceptions from respondents that their institutions are promoting Erasmus Plus opportunities within Europe, but less so beyond Europe. And that was also consistent across our data set. This is presumably interesting information for the Commission, but we also wonder, what does the idea of global engagement mean to universities of applied sciences? Is it important to think beyond Europe? And if so, how and in what ways? So we hope that'll be some food for thought on your side. Okay, we are seeing a lot of information on the screen here and not trying to overwhelm again, but a couple of different areas of questions having to do with things like the Commission's regional priorities for international partnerships beyond Europe, BIPs, whether or not institutions are encouraging the creation of those. How is it going with recognition procedures for student mobility, et cetera? What we found here that I'd just like to highlight from this screen is that recognition procedures were the weak point for all respondents. This seems to be an ongoing problem across the European higher education area. Half or less strongly agreed with this idea that initiatives and recognition at the European level have made recognition procedures more efficient and transparent in the universities of applied sciences. We also saw that different mobility opportunities meeting the needs of students are considered to be, rather strong among universities of applied sciences respondents. 73% of them indicated that they strongly agreed that the different mobility opportunities offered by the Erasmus Plus program are fitting the needs of students at their institution. And this was less so at the European average and also among research universities. So a lot of information here about what people are thinking about these institutional dynamics. But again, we'll share so that you can digest these a little more slowly on your own time. I'm going to hand back shortly to Jody after saying one more word here. University alliances. We could have spent, the entire survey asking questions about this very, very hot topic. We asked a very simple question in the end about whether or not or how respondents would characterize the effect of the European University alliances on their own institutions' internationalization activities. What you see here is that overall, the University of Applied Sciences respondents less often said that the initiative has a positive effect, only 34%, as compared to 43% of all other respondents and 48% of research university respondents. And of course, many more University of Applied Sciences respondents said that their institution is not involved in this initiative. We know that's changing now, and that will be interesting, I think, to follow this question in the future as we repeat it in future iterations of the barometer. Okay, definitely now back to Jody.
Thank you, Laura. All right, so taking you through the last few slides with data. So as a part of the barometer, we also asked a couple of questions related to topics of interest. Laura, of course, already shared this slide, which was one of the slides which had the most complicated graphs on it, with a lot of topics. But at the end of the survey, we also asked a particular question, which gave the opportunity to respondents to indicate up to 2 topic areas of particular interest to them, either personally or professionally. And these were optional questions to fill in. And out of that, as you can see on the screen here, student and staff well-being came out as the the topic that was most often chosen as being of interest, closely followed by digitalization of administrative tasks, and in third place, inclusion and diversity. So if we look at the data specifically for universities of applied sciences, and Laura, if you can, thank you, we can see those same topics popping up in the top 3 as well, however, in a slightly different order. So we have student and staff well-being moving to the 2nd place, and actually digitalization of administrative tasks was most often chosen by 35% in this case of the universities of applied sciences respondents. Closely followed though by student staff well-being and inclusion and diversity coming in there in a shared 3rd place actually, with virtual internationalization activities as well. So today, based on recommendations from Matilda, we're going to quickly dive into 2 of these topics, and that is student staff well-being on the one hand and virtual internationalization activities on the other. So as you can already see on the slide deck here, what we did with all of these questions is that people who shared that they had a particular interest in a topic, we quietly assumed that they at least were aware of developments within that particular area at their institution. So we asked them several follow-up questions related to how they feel their institution is doing within this topic area. So first of all, we asked whether the institution or organization has a clear plan for, in this case, the student and staff well-being activities it is pursuing. And we can see here that there is a relatively high level of agreement there, with once again, both the blue and the red, the 2 bars on the left, indicating that level of agreement. We see the agreement slightly increasing, and that is something that we have seen overall on an EHEA average as well, when it comes to the leaders leading this particular initiative forward. So having leaders who are committed to, in this case, student and staff well-being activities, we see over 60% agreeing with this statement. However, the numbers then definitely drop when we come to a few of the following statements. First of all, whether enough sufficient financial resources are being invested into this particular topic area. And if we go to the next one, providing stakeholders with sufficient non-financial resources, we definitely see that those levels of agreement drop there. And that also happened on the EHEA average results. These even further drop when we look at whether the institution or organization actually has a clear plan to measure the effects of the activities that they are pursuing within this topic area. And also when looking at whether there is a clear plan for using the data that it collected to, for example, advise further strategy making, future plans, etc. So really low levels of agreement there. Once again, not just for the universities of applied sciences, but also for the EHEA average. But luckily, we see it pick up a little bit when looking at whether the institution or organization has made progress within this area in the last 12 months. Still not exactly getting close to even the 50%, but still a relatively high level of agreement there. If we then look at the virtual internationalization activities, within this particular topic area, we felt it was very relevant to at least ask an indicating question to show what is meant with the term virtual internationalization activities. 66% of our universities of applied sciences respondents indicated that that automatically refers to COIL for them. And this is actually a slight difference with the EHEA average, where virtual mobility came out on top. So this came in 2nd place for the universities of applied sciences. But I think overall it's very interesting to see that especially COIL resonates with this particular audience when talking about those virtual internationalization activities. So if we look at that same set of questions then, or statements, has a clear plan for the virtual internationalization activities it is pursuing, we see a really low percentage of agreement here. So only 19% of the respondents at the universities of applied sciences indicated that they agree with this statement. And that is actually in contrast to the EHEA average, where we saw higher levels of agreement. This trend kind of continues when we look at the next few statements as well. So we see that for the leaders, it does slightly pick up, as we saw for student and well-being as well. But once again, really low percentages when we look at investing sufficient financial resources, providing stakeholders with sufficient non-financial resources, and even lower when we look at whether the institution or organization has a clear plan to measure the effects of the virtual internationalization activities it is pursuing, and whether there is a clear plan for using that data that is collected. Also, when we look then at whether the institution or organization has made progress within the last 12 months, we see the levels of agreement a lot higher again. So especially when looking at this complete picture here, we see that when it comes to the leaders that are committed and having made progress, there is still a bit of agreement there. But this is definitely one of the more negative pictures that we have seen within this topic area, but also across other topic areas. So quite striking. And I'd be curious to kind of see indeed where that comes from and whether that resonates with any of the universities of applied sciences representatives here today, but a strikingly negative picture in this case, I would say. All right, I think that brings us to the conclusion, at least from our side, leaving a bit of time for some questions in case there is anything. Obviously, we don't have access to the full data set right now, but if there is anything you're particularly interested in, we're very happy to dive into that for you and provide you with those answers later on. But to recap quickly some of the things that we shared today. So we presented data from a very large group of respondents, so 552 responses overall. We saw high levels of satisfaction linked to jobs, the sense of feeling valued, and the sense of purpose, but slightly higher levels of unsatisfaction, especially related to salary and compensation, but also work-life balance. We saw that 99% of the respondents working at universities of applied sciences have a clear need for training or professional development opportunities. And we did see a quite strong commitment to the internationalization of higher education sector and individual institutions there as well. And as Laura shared with you, all topics apparently need attention at this moment in time, leaving us with a bit of a question there. What do we have available to us in relation to resources, and what can we actually pay attention to? So I think that is where we indeed leave it. Thank you so much for your attention. If you go to the QR code, you can download the full report, which is freely available. And if there are any questions at this stage, I think we'd be very happy to answer those.
Matilda, we can't hear you.
No, can't hear you. No.
I'm here as
Yes.
well. Let's say to take over from Mathilde, but I know that we can open the floor for questions if someone has one. I'm not sure exactly how we do that. I know Mathilde's the one who knows the webinar platform for asking, unmuting somebody who wishes to ask a question, but it can also be done in the chat. But well, from my side, thank you very much for the very interesting overview. A lot of data, as you said, and yeah, I don't know whether you mentioned, Laura, whether I missed it, but we said we're hoping to do something at our annual conference with you in Amsterdam around you saw that there is a need for training, and I'm sure that many of our members who are and others who will be attending the conference will be interested in that, and so we'll have information coming soon on the agenda.
We're really looking forward to that, and actually just really delighted to have this new kind of conversation with EHEA, with the emphasis on skill building, in the European context. We're really excited to see how this plays out in terms of internationalization activities and objectives in your sector. So it's really special to be able to, now have this direct line of communication and learn more from one another about what those needs and interests are.
So there's here one in the chat. Yeah. What do you think about response understanding concepts? A bit, you can see it, can't you? Internationalization.
Yes, exactly.
What would you say they would yeah. And perhaps I'm not sure whether you can answer this follow-up question, is whether the understanding would be different for you, as life sciences, as opposed to the sector as a whole. So
I think that's an excellent question. And you can only imagine the conversations that Jody and I had, and also with our advisory board in the development and piloting of the survey around that notion of, essential concepts, terminology that we might be using, phrasing, and indeed that understanding. So I can only imagine, given the diversity of institutional contexts, given the diversity of national contexts and regional contexts, that there will be indeed some different ways of thinking about this work. And that's why I think it's important that we situate these findings or understand them for what they are, which is the beginning of an unpacking of a much more complicated conversation and detailed conversation about what this means at one's own institution. So yes, I think there will be some very different understandings of that need to be appreciated and explored at much more local levels than at a broad level. Yeah, so this is very relevant and true.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that in terms of just the specific context for universal applied sciences. I mean, it's not, I know the data actually doesn't show it completely, but I would say that the universal applied sciences sometimes are more international. To date, that's what we've got some evidence. In other areas, they're less so. So I think it's difficult just to say they are more or less internationally orientated. The kind of presumption is that there will be less because they're not as big and they haven't got the same capacity. But in fact, in some things we've noticed, for example, on Erasmus Plus mobility, they are more in some countries, not in all, that they've got more mobilities on average per student. So I think it just depends on what we are talking about. And maybe on a strategic level, they may be on average less international. But in any case, whatever level of internationalization our members are at, we want to try and help them to increase it. So thank you very much from my side.
Yeah, I did want to say too that I think it's important to reiterate the fact that this survey did not ask respondents to go back to their institutions and collect specific data about how many mobilities, how many partnerships, that type of thing. There are different organizations that are capturing some of that information, and we have a very clear understanding that not every respondent who would complete our survey would have access to that information. So the point of the barometer is really to get a sense of what's your sense of what's going on? What do you know and what do you feel about how it's going and what some of the challenges are? And I think what that offers is a way to marry those perceptions with data to try and find out where there are gaps in reality and perception, and to really kind of bring frontline professionals into a conversation about what's actually going on and what seems to be working or not. So yeah, this is, we like to think of our survey as part of a broader ecosystem of research on what's happening that can help give a more holistic picture. And for policymakers to understand that, and institutional leaders, as you roll out initiatives, as you set goals and agenda items, how is that being experienced on the front lines by the individuals who are in charge of implementing those things? And that perception of what is internationalization is a really great example. How do we all understand that notion?
Okay, no, excellent. So there's lots of things to explore, and we would hope to do this maybe in a project of some description that we could get funded about internationalization at UAS, because there's clearly some work to be done as well, and we can see that in European Universities Initiative that it's still a fairly small proportion of the alliances that are US based, but it's still a significant minority, I'd say. But this is part of it in a way, is it's the backgrounds to the strategic capacity for internationalization. So again, please do join us at the training session, and if you're interested specifically on this topic, anyone who's in this webinar, to contact us, and we're happy to exchange more. So yeah, unless there are any other questions, we can close the session now. Just from my side, thank you very much, Laura and Jody, for presenting to us. This is very useful, and I think now we'll know more about the barometer. The slides will be distributed by Matilda very shortly after the webinar. So
Thank you
you,
for having us
everybody.
so much.
And yes, good weekend to everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.